Okay, good morning, everyone. I am going to go over more problems for your test on Wednesday and Thursday as I take a look at your homework and as well as your quiz, as well as answering questions that some of you have. I do want to clarify or clear up some things. One is factoring. So it is true that I could solve x squared is equal to 25. It's true I could solve for that. I can find the value of x and that gives me 25 by taking the square root of both sides. So that would just be x is equal to plus or minus 5. But if I ask you to factor that on a test, you need to show actually factoring to solve that. So again, I will begin with x squared is equal to 25. And if it asks you to factor, remember to factor or find the zeros. Find the zeros. Let's say that find the zeros. Factor and find the zeros. So factor and find the zeros. So in order to do that, we have to make one side of the equation equal to 0. Okay, so I would subtract 25, so x squared minus 25 equals 0. And now I would factor, okay, and so that's a difference of squares. So remember, a squared minus b squared is equal to a minus b times a plus b. And so I would factor that x minus 5 times x plus 5 equals 0. And then I would set each factor equal to 0 and then solve. So x minus 5 equals 0, x equals 5, and x plus 5 equals 0, x equals negative 5. Okay, so again, I get the same answer as I did if I just outright solve it. X is equal to plus or minus 5, x is equal to 5, x is equal to negative 5. But I went about it differently. Okay, I factored to find the zeros. All right, so again, make sure you actually factor to find the zeros as opposed to solving it outright. Okay, otherwise you'll lose a couple points. And as we move forward, you'll understand why it's important to factor. Okay, a couple of weeks from now, or when we actually get into chapter 6, it's not so important to find the zeros. It's more important to factor. And so we do want to emphasize you being able to factor quadratic expressions. Very important. Likewise, if you had something like x squared equals, let's say here, 10x, and you want to, again, factor and find the zeros. So again, you want to make one side equal to 0, so that would be x squared. So I would have to subtract 10x minus 10x equals 0. And then I would factor that. So I could factor out an x, and that will leave x minus 10 equals 0. And then I would find, set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So x is equal to 0, and then x minus 10 equals 0, x equals 10. So my zeros, so the solutions would be either x is equal to 0 or x is equal to 10. Okay. All right, so again, make sure you factor to find the zero. Set one side equal to 0, and then factor. Okay, factor to find the zeros. Factor to find the zeros. All right, so make sure you do that. Let's see here. The other thing, again, you'll have problems where you have to, problem number 10. You'll have a problem like you did on your review problem number 10. So I'll give just an example. So f of x equals, let's say here, equals 4 times x minus 2 squared minus 12. And you want to find the zeros. So again, you want one side of the equation to equal 0. Okay, so I'll set f of x, or y, equals 0. Remember, y is equal to f of x. So 0 equals 4 times x minus 2 squared minus 12. Again, I want to find the zeros. So I need to solve this equation. You know, that's really no different than solving the equation if I had 0 equals 4x minus 12, you would add 12 to both sides. So 12 equals 4x. And then you would divide both sides by 4. And you would get 3 equals x. Well, it's the same process. The process is the same, except we'll have a square root. So it's the same process. So here I have to add 12 to both sides, and I'll get 12 equals 4 times x minus 2 squared. Divide by 4. Divide both sides by 4. So 3 equals x minus 2 squared. And so now here I have to take the square root of both sides. So take the square root of that and the square root of that. So this will equal plus or minus root 3 equals x minus 2. And so my zeros would be, and add 2 to both sides. So 2 plus or minus root 3 equals x. Right? So make sure you can find the zeros of a quadratic function when it's in standard form. You set one side equal to 0, and then you can solve for x. All right. And again, I'm just reviewing those things that students have had questions on. Again, know how to complete the square to find the zeros. So if I had x squared plus 8x, let's see here, plus 5 equals 0, and you want to complete the square. Notice there's no factors of 5 that add up to 8. So to complete the square, you want the quadratic term and the linear term on one side, and then the c term on the other side. So this would be x squared plus 8x equals negative 5. Now complete the square. So again, I'll just draw completing the square. Oops, not quite a perfect square there, so let me do it. So here's my x, and there's my x squared, and then I have a positive 8. I'll take 8 and divide it by 2, and that would be 4. So 4 and 4. So there's my 4x and 4x, and that gives me my x squared plus 8x. But then when I complete the square, I'll add 16. So I need to add 16 to both sides. So this is going to be x squared plus 8x plus 16. I need to add 16 equals 5. If I add 16 to the left side, I have to add it to the right side. Otherwise, the equations don't balance. But this x squared plus 8x plus 16, that's a perfect square trinomial whose sides are x plus 4 times x plus 4. And so this is just x plus 4 squared equals 21. And now again, we take the square root of both sides. So this would be x plus 4 equals plus or minus root 21. There's no factors of perfect squared factors of 21. And then finally, I would just subtract 4. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus root 21. So done. All right. So again, make sure you know how to complete the square. And then the last thing, and this is perhaps the easiest, but let's say here if we want to write a polynomial. We want our quadratic function, chapter 6 I'm thinking of. But a quadratic function is a polynomial to begin with anyway. So let's say here I start with zeros. So I start with zeros of x equals negative 4, for example, and 3. So those are my zeros. In other words, if I have a quadratic, and I don't know what it looks like, but all I know is that it will cross the x-axis. So it will cross the x-axis at negative 4 and 3. So those would be my zeros. Well, it's easy to write a polynomial that has zeros of negative 4 and 3. We kind of reverse the process. So if x is equal to negative 4, if I add 4 to both sides, I would have x plus 4 equals 0. And so x plus 4 would be one factor. X plus 4 would be one factor. And then if x is equal to 3, So if my 0 was 3, and if I subtract 3 from both sides, I get x minus 3 equals 0. So x minus 3 would be the other 0. Okay? So to write a quadratic function that has zeros of -4 and 3, or factors of x plus 4, x minus 3, I just multiply my factors. I FOIL. Okay, here, actually all I need to do is just multiply. So my quadratic equation, I would just multiply, or in this case FOIL. So x times x is x squared, and then x times -3 is minus 3x, and then 4 times x is plus 4x, and then 4 times -3 is -12. So this would be x squared plus x -3x plus 4x is x minus 12. So that would be my quadratic function. That would have zeros of -4 and 3. Okay, it's kind of like you reverse the process. All right, and it's easily verifiable. I could factor this again. So factors of -12 that add up to 1. Well, that would be positive 4 and -3. It would be x plus 4 times x minus 3. And if I set that equal to zeros, my zeros would be -4 and 3. Okay, so, and again, I'll just run through a couple more of those, but you'll see if starting with zeros and writing a quadratic equation is pretty easy to do. So again, let's say here if my zeros were x is equal to 2 and 7. So those were my zeros there. So what's a quadratic function that gives me those zeros? So again, I have x is equal to 2, so my factor would be x minus 2. I have x is equal to 7, my factor would be x minus 7. Okay, so now I just multiply. So x minus 2 times x minus 7. So x times x is x squared, x times -7 is -7x, -2 times x is -2x, and -2 times -7 is plus 14. Combine my like terms, and I would get x squared minus 9x plus 14. So that would be my quadratic function. That would have zeros of 2 and 7. 2 and 7. And then lastly, I'll just do one more. What happened if my zeros were x is equal to 0 and x is equal to -5? So those are my zeros. What's a polynomial that gives me zeros of 0 and -5? Well, one factor is just x. It's just x. X is equal to 0. So that's just one factor. Okay? And then if x is equal to -5, then the other factor, if I add 5 to both sides, I would get x plus 5 equals 0. So my factors would be x plus 5 as one factor, and then x is the other factor. X is the other factor. So the quadratic function that would give me zeros of 0 and -5 would just be x times x plus 5. And so that would be x squared plus 5x. So that would be my quadratic function, x squared plus 5x. And it would give me zeros of 0 and -5. So again, if I were to factor, so if I said 0 equals x squared plus 5x, if I factor out an x, I would have x times x plus 5, so 0. And then if I found the 0, so x would equal 0, and x plus 5 equals 0, x equals -5. All right, so I started with zeros of 0 and -5. And the polynomial that gives me zeros of 0 and -5 would be x squared plus 5x. Okay, so that's more review of your test, and you'll have that either Wednesday or Thursday.